What is a breakhold? The first goal that we talked about is don't get hit. And corollary, don't get grabbed. But what happens if you do get grabbed? Breakhold happens. As the name implies, it's the way that we break free of a hold. And almost all of the time, it employs, or we employ, the principles of physics in it. So I'm going to take just a second to make sure we're all on the same page concerning a few ideas of leverage. If you've ever been on the playground and you've seen kids on a teeter-totter going back and forth like this, it's always mounted in the center. And if the kids are the same weight, they can just gently keep moving back and forth. If they don't do anything, it balances. But if you have a heavier child on one end, if, for instance, if this one weighs 50 pounds and this one weighs 100, bong, that happens. We've seen it, right? Well, let's approach it from a slightly different perspective. If we can have a 100-pound person moving a 50-pound person easily, why can't we adjust the place, the balance point, the fulcrum, to make it easier? Okay? If I slide the fulcrum down this way, just the weight of the bar starts to pull it. Makes sense, right? So if this end of the bar is wedged under something heavy, we've got a fulcrum here, and the bar is sitting here wedged under a stone. If the stone weighs 100 pounds and is holding the bar up, if the distance between the stone and the fulcrum is, let's say, 1 foot, and the distance between the fulcrum and up here is 2 feet, that means that I don't have to use 100 pounds of force here to pick up a 100-pound stone. I only need to use 50 pounds of force to move the 100-pound stone. Okay? And inversely, if you want to hold something down, it takes less effort to hold it down with a heavier object up here. If you kind of get a grasp on that, you'll see what we're going to be doing concerning breakholds. Now, if you're one of the folks that has had some background in any one of the different varieties of martial arts referred to with the Kenpo label, whether it's Chinese Kenpo, American Kenpo, IKKA, any of them, you are familiar with the idea of what they call self-defense techniques, combinations of things to deal with an attack situation. Most of those combinations in those schools include punching or kicking attacks. Well, we deal with those separately, like we have already dealt with block and counter strikes, as opposed to having to memorize a bunch more names. It doesn't matter what the name is. If something's headed at my face, this arm is free, I'm going to block it. If there's an opening up here, I'm going to strike to it. If there's an opening down here, I'll strike to it. If we need longer range, I'll strike to it. If we need a lot longer range, I'll strike to it. We just separate them out. For us, breakholds would be the self-defense techniques out of Kenpo schools that deal with grabbing techniques. And the first technique we're going to deal with today is for what we call a same-side wrist grab. Jeremy, if you'll join me up here. Now, by same-side wrist grab, what I mean is, if Jeremy has ended up with his left hand attached to my right wrist, you see they're on the same side of our body. If he had grabbed me with that hand instead of this hand, we would call that a cross wrist grab. They are not the same thing. You don't treat them the same way. The techniques won't work the same. They're totally different. So don't just say a wrist grab. This is for a same side wrist grab. Now, the idea of using a breakhold technique is to, number one, get free, but at the same time, not open ourselves up to be damaged by some other offensive move by the attacker. In other words, if all I do is stand here and start to pull and try to jerk my arm out, well, now I've got both my arms tied up. He's going to punch the fire out of me right there. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to have a maneuver that will protect us from any of his other weapons. At the same time, we get free. The other thing that we would like to accomplish is, as we get free, we want to set ourselves up for a counter strike. Because if he's grabbed us to start off with, he is either as big or larger than we are, or he thinks he is. And it doesn't matter either way, because if he leads off with a grabbing technique, he's going to try to follow up with another grabbing technique, and we don't want that to happen. So after we get free, we're going to do something to persuade him not to do it again. I understand that the likelihood of someone walking up and grabbing me on the wrist like this in this position is not real high. But what is real high is that when scuffling is going on, someone can end up grabbing hold of your hand thinking you're about to punch him or something to restrain it. Now you find yourself in a same-side wrist grab. The difference at that point being is you'll have to maybe reposition yourself just a little bit before you do the maneuvers I'm about to show you. But that's how they're going to happen. If I showed them to you in the actual mix of a combat situation where you've got grappling, striking, kicking, biting, whatever going on, it would be hard to identify the key elements to it as far as how to set up the leverage to your advantage. That's why we use this relatively sterile positioning in all of the break holds I'll show you. So just, let your imagination run wild of how you could end up in this position. And there's no such thing as too much imagination. I'm sure it's happened if you can think of it. So the first thing that I will want to do once I realize that I've been grabbed is to grab him back. Because at this point, he has been kind enough to create a fulcrum right here for me. And I don't want that fulcrum to leave. Because if I just start wrestling around with him, once again, he can do other things to me. But by grabbing him back, number one, I've put my left arm between us. He has just lost all the targets down here. This arm is also loaded up, so if before I can execute the break hold, he decides to take a swing with his hand, I can go from this grab into any sort of a block to take care of the punch he might be throwing. That's extending out the what-if scenarios, so let's focus back on here. Okay, I've grabbed him back. Now, I am going to step straight towards him with my right foot. As I step, I'm going to rotate my wrist, my arm, in this case, inward. And the reason I'm going to do it is it'll make it harder to hang on to. When I go to this position inside of his grip, you can see it makes it slipperier. It's easier to hold on to something of a fairly large diameter, if it's a perfect circle, than it is something real small. And I just went from being a large circle this way to a smaller circle this way. By making it more difficult for him to hang on, I've given myself an extra advantage on top of the leverage that I'm about to create on this fulcrum. So, well, how does this create a fulcrum? Well, the fulcrum is really his index finger, the web of his thumb and index finger, and his thumb. And the strength that he has to resist the rest of my body is simply these three fingers down here. Pinky, ring finger, middle finger. So he gave me a fulcrum. I made sure the fulcrum didn't leave. Now I'm going to get my hand out of the way so you can see it here. And as I step forward, remember I'm turning my wrist, and I'm pushing forward with this elbow. Now you notice with my arm being close to my body, I can put a lot of body weight to help this going forward. I'm not just trying to push with an arm. That's a weak, awkward movement. I'm stepping out, I've got the body here, and one finger at a time, he's being pulled off, because right here's my leverage point. He, on the short end of the stick, has got less than an inch of leverage. Remember that bar that I showed you on the balance? I, on the other hand, have got at least 16 to 18 inches, even if it's tucked in against my body. So I've got like an 18 to 1 advantage on power. It's like being 18 times stronger than he is as I step through. He simply is not going to be able to hold on to it as I come through. Now, I'm trying to aim this elbow at that elbow, but it doesn't matter all that much if you make a direct hit or not, and I'll show you why in a second. We're going to step up and break like this. Now, remember we were concerned a while back about that other weapon. When I've pulled him this way and snapped across here, even if it went under or over, I've still moved his body. His right punch is now out. There's not a thing he can do about it. Likewise, his right leg is pretty helpless. If he is a highly accomplished kicker, maybe, and if he's very flexible, he might be able to balance back on his right leg, take his left leg, and kick behind my head. Well, all I have to do is lean my head forward and that kick's going nowhere. And the number of people that can do that, there's just not many, okay? So that's the deal. We've been grabbed, we grab back, we rotate inward as we step up. There, the arm is broken free. Now, I said that it doesn't matter if we go under the arm, hit it directly, or go over. The most likely scenario is that you're going to hit it, but you're going to slide off one way or the other. If the person is taller than you are, you very possibly slide off underneath it. If he's a little bit shorter, you may slide off on top. But the follow-up will be the same, okay? So we're here, grab, step up, here. Now, what have I done from this position before that we've done? Knife hand, right across the ribs. Now, does that have to change if it had been a shorter attacker? Nope. Only the target changes. So the reflexive motions that we want to link together is we've been grabbed, grab, step up, rock, knife hand strike. Notice the range. This range is perfect for knife hand. This is still good for knife hand. Okay? What would happen if I'd gotten a little close in here? It's not so good for the knife hand, but there are other things we can do, and I'm going to show you. Likewise, what would happen if he had pulled back and I'm standing back here and it's a little bit out of range for the knife hand? We have to address those. What I want you to consider is that the technique, the primary follow-up is going to be the knife hand, either to here or to here. And you notice it's him that's changing, not so. We've only changed our arm this much. It's going to glide up off of this arm. If you're shorter, it's not a problem. You'll go right up. Or it's going to glide right under. So there's the opening. Now let's get back to that short range. When we were doing block encounters, what block do you remember we did for a really close one? We did an inward elbow strike, right? Okay, so if I've got this part down, we end up close. If I'm in here, this is probably gone. This hand can still be a check. This elbow strike can slide underneath it. If he were taller, the elbow strike could also slide up over it. The distance, the may-I, is what's different and what dictates which follow-up you use. Okay, so now we can see, well, we've got a normal situation. We follow with a knife hand. A closer situation, we can follow with an inward elbow strike. What happens if we end up a little further apart? Okay, even though I'm stepping up with this, he's pulled back just a little bit. Not going to reach, not going to reach. That will reach there or there. Okay? What happens if he's really too far away? boom, he's back here. I'm out of all these ranges. You got it, front snap kick. Okay. The takeaways from this self-defense technique, this breakhold maneuver. Use leverage to your advantage. Be explosive. Now, on this particular technique, I can not grab him. I cannot be explosive. All I have to do is rotate it like this. And regardless of how strong he is, I can separate from him. If you end up with a friend that says, wow, that stuff's a bunch of baloney, let him grab you like that. If you do this much properly, he can't hang on. An 18-to-1 strength advantage can't be defeated. But we don't want to just waltz into that if it's someone on the street that really means us harm. We want to make sure we put all the parts together so it's counter grab, rotate, break, knife hand. Or he ends up closer, counter grab, rotate, here, elbow strike. Okay, now notice this hand hadn't gone to sleep. It's still up here in a guarding position, a checking position, as some systems call it. Okay, or if he's further away, we step up, break it away. Okay, we've still got punching range to go there or to go there. And if he's really farther away, the snap kick like we talked about. That is the idea of a breakhold technique. That's how we use modern science to make the technique work. They've been using the technique like this for a long, long time. We can pretty well bet that many of the people that used it couldn't have proven on paper why it works, but it works. Now, you can prove on paper why this technique will work for you. Hope you found it informative.